Hey guys, thank you so much for you supporting us in Brazilian Association ABMeta, a non-profit association in Expo Metaverse to speak about metaverse markets, especially, and give a little bit of your background, your experience. So I'm here with Amy Packy and Andrew Leneuve. Am I correct? Leneuve? Can I pronounce like this?
Yes, Leneuve.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, guys. So it's with you. I'm here listening.
Excellent. Shall I start?
Amy.
All right.
Yes, please go ahead.
Fantastic. So I'm Amy Peck. I'm the founder and CEO of EndeavorXR. We are a strategy and consulting firm working with some of the largest companies in the world about what used to be just XR strategy and has now moved into XR, Metaverse, Web3, and the future of everything strategy. So we're very busy. But I'm very excited to be here today because we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of XR to the metaverse. Andre is a good friend of mine. He's we've traveled the world together talking about this exact topic, and so this will be very much like our dinner conversation that we have when we're in the same place at the same time. So Andre.
Dinner or meal conversation because we're at the different time zones, all three of us. And this is one of the distinct part of the metaverse because like what is the time zone where we are will define also our mental state in the conversation. So Flavio, thank you so much for having us. I'm Andre Leneuve, venture partner XR at Startup Wise Guys. Startup Wise Guys is the largest accelerator in Europe for B2B startups. We have 350 and counting companies in portfolio and 60 talents in our team, deploying capital across 6 verticals: general B2B SaaS, cybersecurity, fintech, sustainability, industry 4.0. And personally, myself, I lead the extended reality, which encompasses everything 3D, virtual reality, and augmented reality as an interface to access 3D models, and also spatial AI, which drags insights from the spatial data and estimates, make estimation inferences based on that data. So yeah. You raised a very interesting question, and for us as a venture capital, is always important to know what are the numbers behind the business case. And in terms of numbers, what I can say, like there are multiple reports that report different numbers, starting from like 80 billion back in 2016 by Goldman Sachs, and up to 13 trillion that are like attributed to the metaverse. By I believe Citigroup report released in 2022, and all those numbers actually, when it comes to the business case that when we evaluate, doesn't make sense. I mean, it just shows the size of the opportunity overall. But what we are looking at in terms of numbers is primarily like what is your insight as an entrepreneur into specific industry or business case that you are exploring. I'm happy to kind of share. I have a tab here just to list, like to show you on the screen, like a couple reports that actually I consider fundamental for the industry, if it makes sense. Do you want me to share?
Absolutely, please share with us. That'd be great.
Okay, and then we basically we can Amy, feel free to jump in and comment those numbers, because basically this is the background and context for our meal conversation.
Yeah, and we'll make these links available so that Flavio can share when this gets released.
Yeah,
for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So for me, can you see my screen now?
Now you're showing. It's opening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can see it.
Yeah. Basically, it's all started in 2016 January when Goldman Sachs attributed 80 billion to VR/AR by 2025. Well, we will see in a couple of years whether it's get to realization, or we probably already passed those numbers, given the Facebook expenditures on the matter. Then, like, what I would suggest for anybody who like to explore is to look into a couple industry landscapes that in 2016, 2019 were produced by the Venture Reality Fund or the VR Fund. So they stopped doing that in 2019. Those are like the most recent landscapes of the industry, and you see how populated those all groups with big names and small emerging companies. So then one of their important reports for me was Gartner and the term intelligent digital mesh, which I wouldn't try to cite this report right now, but you can see and what it's speak for itself. And what's interesting, it was released right before the COVID. So basically all the trends that were exhibited in this report, they just accelerated by, 3-5 years because of COVID. And then finally, right before COVID, like the first trillion attributed to VR AR by 2030 was thrown out by PwC. It was very fluffy definition, like impact on GDP, but still people were, oh yes, this is great. This is the big number. We need to believe in that. Well, of course, the Metaverse Primer by Matthew Ball put like good foundation into conversation, but also raised a lot of controversial topics, which I think Amy would happy to comment as well. And then finally, this year, like two big firms released their estimations, which is CT, and they attributed to the narrow definition of metaverse, which is VR, AR, 1 or 2 trillion by 2030. And then, of course, like the broad definition of the metaverse that includes like Web3, all interactions, like e-commerce, all the stuff, it can go up to like 8-13 trillion. But this also becomes very inflated, I would say. Like, what exactly do you mean by calling those things metaverse? While McKinsey was a little bit less, like a little bit more conservative, and did like only 5 trillion by 2030. But still, it just shows the scale of the opportunity.
Yeah, and the trajectory, of sort of the increase of what those projections are. And then, of course, as soon as Facebook changed their name to Meta, that was really, we were just coming out of COVID, and then the name change, and that really kind of blew the roof off, if you will, where people really were starting to look at this as this, broad and huge opportunity. But what's interesting is looking at all of these numbers is, they're all kind of citing this very much, revenue first approach. And that's important. We want to understand the numbers and what the opportunity is, but the digital landscape is infinite, right? So just from a logic standpoint, the money is there. What I think we need to look at is how to leverage this technology, not only to sort of improve, processes and services, but as far as consumers, how do we engage consumers in a new way? How do we protect identity, but leverage identity as a sales channel, right? And sort of by having a one-to-one relationship with customers, how do we, whether your customer is B2B or B2C, how do we engage in a much more meaningful way that is protective of data, that improves experience, and looks at this digital landscape, again, not just as a revenue generating opportunity, but really a way for us to improve life experience. So I think we can tackle all of this leveraging this technology.
Yeah, totally agree. Those digital flows of data between consumers, brands, corporations, and between consumers themselves, create a lot of opportunities to leverage that data. The major question is whether the data will be leveraged in your benefit or in somebody else, or it would be used to extract value out of your pocket. Yeah. And because the more data you have, the better predictions you can infer from the data. But as Amy said, like, are we going to become a better version of ourselves, or we will become just more greedy and less connected, actually, instead of being better connected, just because we would not have enough time to talk with each other, because we'd be, I don't know, exchanging just data flows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you see a little bit of that with social media today, but there's an interesting trend that's happening, and I think it's why we can attribute such success to TikTok, is that there's something about that we as consumers, from a social standpoint, are really responding to like truth and veracity and people being the real version of themselves. Social media, when it came out, and as the tools started to proliferate to allow us to paint this really glossy picture of our lives. So we're moving from like extraordinary experience to extraordinary experience, and we're kind of like leaving all the boring bits out. That there's something about the way that people now are expressing the true version of themselves, whether it's like a talent that they have or knowledge that they have, or just being silly or being helpful, having had trauma and trying to help other people through the same trauma. That trend, I think, is really important in how we can look at what some of the opportunities of the metaverse overall will be. But maybe it's worthwhile, Andre, for both of us to kind of talk about what our definition of the metaverse is, because I think there's a lot of different versions floating around. Matthew Ball has written a great book, very well-researched book on the matter. But why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, I can speak about Brazil. I can speak about from my perspective.
Please go ahead.
Also traveling outside of Brazil, especially when you look for metaverse as an ecosystem, and that's something that people are using to give the name for the Web 2.0 and all the technologies that they come together. Like these events, Expo Metaverse, we are bringing IoT, 5G, artificial intelligence. We're not speaking about just immersive tech and just social media, just social connection, but everything. Like one of the things that's it's very promising. It's a good promise. Let's say it's digital twin for companies. Let's say if you have something that you can have a layer and control, and when you put all these things together, and people see, oh, this new technology. Oh no, this is edge computer. This is blockchain. This is Web 2.0. This is VR, this is AR, this mixed reality, and the person like, okay, this is metaverse. So I see here in Brazil as a perspective that everything that brings these technologies and bring the possibilities of having something, environment or assets, or having this kind of, multiplayer interactive. So it's metaverse. Doesn't matter if you have avatar, you have an environment 3D or not. It's just a matter of new technologies. And when you put this together, so you can understand like, oh, maybe those numbers make sense if you put all this technology and all this buzz that it's coming with. So this is my perspective from personally. Okay, I'm not doing research about this, but what I'm seeing like around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Your turn. Yeah.
Well, digital twin is a good definition. I would dare to go a little bit beyond like digital definitions. And for me, metaverse is also known as noosphere, which is the space of knowledge, and how this knowledge correlates and connects with physical objects or digital objects. To what extent it's sort of a spirit of the object that you can and like the universe of those individual knowledges about each. Well, I'm lacking vocabulary here, but basically the infinite number of definitions of one subject, which reflects the perspective of every observer of that object or subject. That would be for me like the metaverse noosphere. But metaverse is the visual representation of that knowledge which is transferable, and everybody speaks about interoperability and about persistence. Yes, it's persistent. It has definitely linked to existing reality, and it's interoperable in sense that you need to transfer that knowledge from one person to another. But yeah, that's very kind of philosophical definition.
Yeah. No, but I think it's funny. I sort of sit in between the two of you. I think it's taking, all digital information and allowing it to be accessible anywhere, anytime, with spatial context, with relevance to your surroundings. And so you're delivering data to the right person at the right place at the right time, anywhere. So this is this always on 3D internet, right? And so but when you mentioned digital twin, which of course is near and dear to my heart, because I think of digital twin as the anchor point for the metaverse for business. So companies should be looking not necessarily at Roblox and Decentraland and Sandbox, but really should be looking at building a fluency with this technology by leveraging digital twin, by leveraging simulation to improve their processes. Because in doing that, the ROI is already proven, right? We've been using XR, digital twins, for and especially for training, for decades. So we know that that's a good jumping off point where a company can start today, even if it's just building, digital twins of their assets or products, or their manufacturing line, or their process, or their entire buildings, right? And then using simulation, AI, to start optimizing all of those processes. And in doing that, they're going to start to build a better understanding of what the capabilities of the technology will be. That at the same time will give them some time for consumers and their customers to catch up, because this is a long play. This is a long sum game, right? This isn't happening tomorrow. And it's an evolution of, digital landscape. We keep talking about Web3. There are companies that aren't even on Web 2 yet, right? They barely have functioning websites. Their, e-commerce isn't great. At best, they're going to be Web 2.5. With a lot of work. What is, you mentioned what's specific to Brazil, what could be really interesting for Brazil and put them in a really good position, and other emerging markets, especially that have some technical chops, right? Which is, you've seen that surge in Brazil in recent years, is that they don't have infrastructure necessarily that they have to unravel. That there are companies that can not quite come out of the gate as native Web3, but can build a Web3 strategy in parallel with how they build their businesses today. And that, I think, is where we're going to see an upset of the traditional, Silicon Valley and as the center of the world of innovation. That's not going to change. It's always going to be an important component and spurring the world on. The difference is there are going to be a lot more players. That's better for all of us. It's better for all of us because now we can infuse this next generation metaverse with multiple cultures, with multiple perspectives. We talk about diversity in this very small terms, right? Around, gender and race. It's really about diversity in everything, diversity in culture, diversity in the way we look at the world. And, ironically, the metaverse is an infinite landscape, but this is an opportunity for us to bring the real world closer together so that we can tackle real world problems together today.
Yeah, absolutely. and those questions about
So
culture.
was very spy. I mean, really, no. It just got very spy, and was great that you speak about like companies that should, instead of putting keeping eyes in Roblox, Sandbox, this kind of social media platform, that it's this kind of cliche, let's say, metaverse cliche, like, okay, metaverse are these platforms. Fortnite's the big one. Roblox, Sandbox. You have this amounts of people. You have brands going there. So people in Brazil are thinking, sometimes they're thinking metaverse is just that. And when you speak about the ecosystem, it's the whole ecosystem. It's all the infrastructure, everything that's coming. And when you speak about digital twin and how companies can look to this opportunity, it's really nice. Thank you for sharing this. It's I think can be like a seed for these people. Maybe some people that are listening the talk right now say, that's opportunity. Let's check for this.
It is. And it's an opportunity they can start on today while they're developing broader strategies.
Yeah.
You're gonna have I'm sorry, Andrew. Just finish.
Go ahead.
You're gonna have a lecture of NVIDIA Omniverse. So they are sharing the platform and how can you build easily, this kind of digital twin, or can create like the training. This kind of use it with this technology, but it's something new. So also, who's watching here, recommend you watch the NVIDIA lecture. It's going to be before.
I'm glad you brought them up as well, because NVIDIA is doing some really interesting things. Jensen Huang just recently did an announcement, his keynote about a month ago, or maybe a month and a half ago now, about also real-time simulation. So once you have a digital twin, they can actually render live simulations and I'm surprised that more people aren't talking about it. I think because all this technology is coming so quickly, it's really hard for companies to stay on top of, blockchain and AI and metaverse and all of this. It's like I always say it's a tsunami of technology, which it really is. But digital twin is an anchor. AI is an anchor, and NVIDIA is investing a lot. Omniverse is a really important platform. It's one that we promote to our clients as well. So I'm right there with you. Make time to watch that as well, but watch this first.
Yeah, definitely digital twins is at the core of the metaverse, because it's a 3D model. It's processes in the 3D model, and it's also rules of physics of those processes that you need to obey in order to replicate those processes. And definitely building this into B2C environments would be way more challenging compared to B2B environment. That's why since like 2019, I was very bullish on enterprise and B2B applications of the XR, while B2C is still very hard market to penetrate, because it's either accessibility of the hardware, for instance, for markets like Brazil, where people would think twice before they spend even $400 for the headset. While back, for instance, in Europe, people are able to spend their money on the headsets, but then the landscape and the real life provides you with so many opportunities to spend your time outside of home and outside of the digital spaces. So people, I think, would be still reluctant to use those spaces. However, when it comes to the B2B environments, the cost of travel that can be significantly reduced if you move your conversations, your customer support into digital twin, would create a huge opportunity. And I have my own Trillion 2 project, to drop into Trillions competition. So basically, for my personal thesis is that event industry will be driver of metaverse adoption in the enterprise environment for meetings, for communication, because it had spending spent like 1 trillion on organizing all those events, expo, conferences, meetings inside the environments, and half of that was spent on travel and accommodation. And now we have a pressure of CO2 reduction on the one side, and on the other side, we have a pressure on P&L by recession that we are entering right now, and everybody becomes very conscious about the spendings. And when it comes down to like where do we cut, I think the event industry will feel this first. Like right now, people still like. I'm very keen to go on all live events and in-person events if I have a chance, because I feel like it's the last like probably 1, 2, 3 years when those events will last at the scale that they were before COVID. And then it's just less efficient to be on an in-person event compared to having the similar interactions in the in the context of the digital twin of the exhibition. And then in terms of the digital twins, like actually humans is the most engaging and the probably the very simple content to deliver, because even simple avatars can create such human relationships between people at distance, way more interactive compared to video stream that we are in right now. So I firmly believe that this is one of the things that will drive adoption of the enterprise, but of the metaverse solution and digital twins. But specifically, it starts in the enterprise meetings and in remote teams. And in that regard, I think Brazil has a lot of talents to offer to the global market, and those talents can access these markets without moving physically from country to country. So they can stay with the families, but work with within the context of the global enterprises in those digital spaces that brings different cultures that Amy mentioned into one space. When people from, let's say, North America would be working with people from South America, and one of the boundaries that still will exist in the metaverse is the time zone. Like in that regard, like transatlantic relationships will probably reduce compared to like north and south axis of interactions in terms of companies. So if you're thinking about where to go with your offering, I would probably consider going north rather than east or west.
That's a great idea. I think also the other interesting thing about these, events, you talk also about just like collaboration and communication. That is the #1 use case that every single company in the world can utilize also today.
Yep.
So aside from digital twin, being able to work with remote teams, which again, post-COVID are much more prevalent than they were pre-COVID, and being able to effectively work with distributed teams or to effectively work with your customers directly in these virtual environments. And, we are going to get to the point where our avatars are more realistic. However, there was a study that Facebook did back in about 2016 or 2017 on avatars. And what they found was, even then they were even more cartoony than they are now. But what they found was that if people made an avatar that looked at least physically similar to themselves, that people who had never met and only interacted as avatars, when they met in real life, were able to identify each other, because we have so many physical cues that, like, I talk with my hands, I speak very fast with a particular cadence. And so, we were able, using voice cues and using kind of the physicality, which does come across with an avatar, especially if the tracking is good. So we're going to start to solve that problem, and there'll be a point at which we can just appear as a hologram. And we'll even get to the point where our AIs will be able to kind of be our digital representative as sort of a note taker doing asynchronous work, so we can solve the time zone problem, which is always a problem. But I do agree. I think it is really smart. That's I've never heard anyone say that, but that makes total sense to start thinking about, where within your time zone is a good market to start so that you can actually work collaboratively together at the same time.
Yeah, because you want to preserve like the family relationships in the market, which is source of the talents, because a lot of markets right now are affected by this asynchronous work, and they have to adjust their working hours to the how to call it, like to the location that sources revenue for them. So basically, they would work during the night or like really against the sunlight, just because this is the demand from the customer. But if you can identify, so for me, like Africa would be in very close relationship with Europe, and like North and South America would be also very related. Another aspect of that is definitely language and the culture. Like the companies were proven to form their internal cultures. So in that regard, I think we will see global enterprises taking more talents and onboarding them into their culture. I think the recent example of Accenture that growing like 25% year over year over the last like couple of years, it's a great example in terms of onboarding like people from different like national cultures into one corporate culture. But then still, like this panel will be translated in Portuguese, right? So
Exactly.
like the language is really boundary, because it has so many cultural things in it, and like do you know why Germans never interrupt? Because
No, I don't.
the negation in the sentence in German is always in the end. So unless you hear until the end of the sentence, you don't know what are you talking. Are you agree with that or you disagree? That's why kind of and those small things they will define also like the proximity of people in the metaverse. So I would also bet on like creation of the language-based metaverses.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think also from a really practical strategy, as a B2B business, you have to start with really interviewing everyone in the company. Like make sure that your key stakeholders understand a baseline. They don't have to be experts in all the technology, but understand kind of what the opportunity is. Like what is a digital twin? What are these products and services that we want to create in the future? And then really do the upfront homework on discovery and bring in experts. I'm sure reach out to Flavio. He has a list of great people he can share with you. But have somebody there to ask the right questions and then zero in, because sometimes there might be a very big problem, but the technology can't quite get there today. But if you solve another problem where the technology shines today, you will have great results, and then you will get additional funding. Because part of the challenge with all companies is you have to sell this concept upstream. And they may be thinking, well, we need to be in Roblox or we need to be in Decentraland because that's what they've been hearing. So you need to plug in where you're going to get the most ROI out of a first proof of concept. And then start looking at, all right, how do we engage other parts of the organization, not just marketing, because this isn't just about telling the story, because you can get a lot of earned media by building a world in Roblox. But guess what? That's 7 figures plus. Then you have to maintain it. And the demographic is 9 to 13. Let's say 16 on its best day. So just because they have 50 million active daily users, that does not mean that's your demographic or your market. So solve the problems that the technology can solve well today. And again, it'll be around collaboration, it'll be around process, it'll be around training. Start to develop that fluency with this whole notion of 3D and managing those 3D assets. So it's not as sexy, I'm not going to lie. Like, it's not the fun stuff. It's not getting, a famous basketball player or famous actor to come and promote your product in a virtual environment. But what it will do is it will set you up for success, because we are going to see a hockey stick at some point. At some point, these devices will hit the market. Now, it may not be a decade. It's a long way off. But if you spent the next decade really building, here we go, we can see all things. I have a whole digital overlay here. But it's really understanding the technology and becoming really opinionated about where it can be valuable. Then the second track is much more aspirational. And I do a talk called Innovating Innovation, which sounds a little repetitive, but what it means is that we can use this technology to innovate how we think about what the future is. And what we're stuck on is, we have stakeholders, we have investors, we have very, very, significant dynamic in terms of our day-to-day business. So we're in this hamster wheel of executing on that. But if we build a parallel stream of true innovation that's cross-functional, and we start thinking about what we as individual consumers want for ourselves, and then we bring that back to business, you will start opening up a way of thinking and a cultural sense of innovation within your company that over the next decade, again, will really set you up for success. Because if you look at the Fortune, the G1000 today, let's say, half of those are either going to fall out or not going to be in existence over the next decade. And that is a scary thought. Companies need to become more limber, but they have time today. What they don't want to do is wait for this to become ubiquitous. They don't want to wait until consumers really care about this, because then they're not going to be able to backfill the necessary knowledge and the culture within the company that they need to cultivate over the next several years.
Yeah. Interesting. Don't you think that speaking about Andrew, like the gap of culture, language, and also time code, don't you feel that AI can help with this? Let's say you can synthesize voice, you can translate, you can record, you can have an avatar that's a scan, just like you, and then you can programming and develop it to have a behavior, and So if you are with this person in avatar, you never know if it's a person behind or not, because it's going to be like real. So don't you think this can fill up this kind of gap? And also, don't you feel that a bunch of gaps that you have right now with the technology, like in a couple of years, you're going to find a solution of really like maybe it's not just the tech, maybe just like how they build something or how they put things together that solve the problem. What's your opinion about what you're being seen, and how would be like the market for this kind of new reality? Like everything is so fast. You're speaking like about TikTok, and it's funny because when people ask me about the future of metaverse and how it's going to be and etc., I say, hey, we don't know the future. We just know that it's coming. It's going to be huge, and it's going to change the world. But how it's going to be, we don't know. What is perspective about this?
You just did something that is really important in terms of innovation. You just came up with a way that you would like to. It was like, well, what if I had my avatar, very realistically appear on my behalf and at least record interactions, or I can give directives. That is not going to be available for a while, but that goes into that innovation track where you start to collect all of those ideas from multiple stakeholders within the company, so that as you're building this strategy, right, because you have to build the strategy to keep the train moving forward, right, because you have to deliver on what you need to deliver today. But building that type of thought process and being imaginative, like you just, you created something out of nothing, right? That is a great idea, but you have to add that into that innovation stream, and that has to happen all the time.
Yeah, I think the idea, and we had some similar conversation with Amy before about how would you implement those avatars and virtual bots. In my opinion, replicating the human intelligence would be definitely very challenging. However, I believe that like translating from one language to another, translating from one visual language to another visual language, like aesthetics from one metaverse to another metaverse, is feasible. So basically, if I show up in the three-dimensional e-commerce boutique, let's say, I will be met by somebody who would appear in a way which is satisfying my visual representation of welcoming hosts. However, the person behind this, like the human brain behind that avatar, still will not be replaced by some algorithm because we are very sensitive whether we're talking to bots or we are talking to another human being. And whenever people discovers that she or he speaks to a bot, even in text messages, it disengages immediately. So in that sense, like the human brain behind the avatar will still be very valuable asset, I believe so. But in order to satisfy my other expectations, you can definitely represent the same person into different digital uniforms, let's put it this way, and synthesize even the voice in a manner which is more relevant to me in terms of like accents, because I would feel like sense of belonging with this person more. And in terms of like whether we would be sending bots to meetings, well, I don't know. Like it's basically a matter of automation. If there is some recurring stuff that you can automate, yes, but in order to access in the most efficient way those digital spaces, you still need to use VR devices. I believe that 2.5D metaverse is like a stepping stone to the real interactions in three-dimensional spaces, and those devices would be easy. Like it's easy to identify whether it's a human being behind or not, and then all the validations, all NFT, blockchain stuff comes into play, because that would be kind of validated and proven that yes, there is a person behind this headset who is the live human being, and I probably can actually obtain his biometric signature to make sure that I'm talking to Flavio and Amy and not to your assistant.
Second point also, this
Yeah.
kind of verification is a real person
Yeah.
or is just a fake person. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's going to become more and more important. It was interesting because there's been a lot of information around, younger generations not, and it's, I think the information, the data has been conflated that that the younger generations don't really care about what's real. That's not entirely true. They're not as concerned whether they're in a digital realm or a physical realm.
Exactly.
Or sometimes even if they're dealing with a physical or a digital person, but they absolutely care about whether or not they know what the environment is, and they really care about whether something is true or not true. So it's another example of how data gets read by whoever is wants to prove a point, because you can kind of crunch data into a direction that you want. But that's a very important distinction about what's true and what's not true. But I can tell you, when I do have a fully AI enabled avatar, that avatar is going to go to all my meetings, and I am going to be having margaritas in Tahiti. So I'm very excited for that day to come.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Last words because I think I ran out of time.
Well, I just wanted to confirm with anecdotes what Amy just said, because recently my daughter was asked, she's 6 years old, was asked, what is your favorite toy that you like to play with? And she said, the other kids.
Yeah, that's great.
So basically, she doesn't care whether it's like that toy or another toy or like digital toy, but she wants to get engaged and get attention of other living being. So, and if that attention comes from the, let's say, artificial being, well, if she gets used to it from her childhood, probably she can grow up and talking with like some digital identity, which is artificial. But in general, I believe that there is intrinsic endeavor to have the real human being on the other side of the screen. Even like, okay, I don't want to go into that direction right now, but even when you watch something that is not happening right now, for instance, it has different interaction with the audience. Yeah. So, Amy, do you want to conclude something?
No, I think we've said it all. I do think that it's not something to be afraid of. You don't have to know everything, but just start small, but have a big vision.
If you start in the big company, talk to Amy. If you start on your own in the small environment and want to sell to the big company, talk to me or talk to us, because we help small startups to get accelerated and reach big ambitions on the B2B market as accelerator.
That's great. And don't forget to follow them. They're amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you. Appreciate your attention.